In this section, I'm going to cover the creation and management of SQL databases. Now, quite important, this section is based on 4 different topics. First off, we're going to talk about deploying SQL Server virtual machines, followed by the creation of SQL Azure database solutions, so really using Azure Platform as a Service, as a packet, a solution for SQL Azure services. Then walking you through some small tips and tricks on managing Azure SQL Server databases, and ending this session with deploying non-SQL database solutions, mainly focusing that SQL is not the only supported workload in Azure. So let me start with a bit more in detail about deploying SQL Server virtual machine solutions, where I'm mainly going to talk about what SQL Server virtual machine solutions is, which ones are supported, and then showing you how you can deploy a SQL Server by using a template. Now, first of all, having support from your vendor like Microsoft Azure in this scenario is pretty important. When you're deploying Azure virtual machines, there are 2 licensing options available. The first one is using SQL VM licensing per minute. The second one is using SQL with an already existing license, also known as bring your own license. Now let me zoom in a little bit more on the difference between the 2. Let's say you're deploying a SQL Server virtual machine in Azure. It's mainly being used for testing and development. In the same way as your pay-per-use concept is valid for the operating system, it's also valid for the SQL Server license. So imagine that you're running the SQL virtual machine only for a couple of hours per month, then it might be interesting to use the permanent licensing flavor. Now watch out that it's supporting SQL Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 3 and all intermediate versions up to SQL 2016. Now another approach is really interesting if you're, for example, executing a lift and shift scenario where you're running virtual machine SQL instances in your on-premises environment today, and for whatever reason you want to migrate a VM to Azure. Instead of paying for your license twice, you're opting in for bring your own license model, basically meaning that you're moving your already running SQL Server virtual machine, including its license, from the on-prem environment to Azure, starting it up in Azure as an Azure virtual machine, which again is supported as of SQL 2012 Service Pack 2, SQL 2014 SP1, and SQL Server 2016. The most important aspect here, bring your own license or overall license mobility, is only supported if your SQL Server on-prem license has been licensed using an enterprise agreement. Now, deploying a SQL Server VM is possible in a couple of different ways. If you're pretty new to deploying VMs in Azure, I encourage you to have a look at one of my previous sections in which I explained in a lot of detail what it takes to deploy virtual machines from the portal by using quick start templates or even building your own ARM templates. The 3 supported ways are directly from the portal. Instead of just deploying a Windows operating system, there is also a pre-configured template available, allowing you to deploy high available SQL infrastructure using a GitHub quick start template, or again from scratch, building your own custom deployment template. So let me jump to another demo in which I'm quickly going to show you how easy it is to find your SQL Server pre-configured RM template from the Azure portal. So from the Azure portal, go and select New. And then I can start searching for SQL. And then I can select SQL Server Always On Cluster. So from here in the description, it will deploy provision 2 SQL Server replicas, a primary and a secondary, including a witness server, including domain controllers, availability sets. So a really interesting topology.
confirming the create steps, and then nothing different than just deploying a virtual machine out of any other template, is completing all these fields and then taking about 20, maybe 25 minutes, and you have your SQL Server always on cluster available. You log on using RDP, for example. You can start using SQL Server. Licensing is being integrated out of the pay-per-minute licensing solution. So really interesting for like demo purposes of SQL Server applications or for quickly building your SQL disaster recovery scenario. So with that, we're at the end of this first video, where I would like to invite you for the next one, talking about deploying Azure SQL databases. So stepping away from virtual machines and using platform as a service in